Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. Well, just about a week ago in Parliament, Minister Vijitha Herath announced that the PTA, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, that draconian piece of legislation which has hung over the heads of the population of Sri Lanka for 46 years, will be repealed in early September. And he said it will probably be replaced by a new act, which will be a different one, which will tackle organized crime, the underworld, and drug racketeering. And to discuss this very welcome news, I have with me Attorney at Law Hejaaz Hizbullah, who is no stranger to the PTA. And no stranger to our viewers. Welcome and good evening, Hejaaz.
Thank you, Niresh. It's nice to be back talking my pet topic, the PTA. Hopefully no more.
Hopefully no more. It's been my pet topic for about 30 years, I think. And I'm very glad to see it go. Right. And hopefully in about 2 weeks' time, we will be able to properly celebrate that. How do you feel about this, Hejaaz? Is it mixed feelings? I mean, for me, it was elation when I heard this, but then a mixed feeling as to why it took so long, why so many governing regimes ignored the fact that it needed to be replaced or repealed, and the fact that government after government used the PTA against the people, even though they themselves, when in opposition, had argued against it. So every single political party has done so. Right. So how do you feel about this, Hejaaz?
I think one would expect me to be elated and celebrating this news. And to some extent, I am, in that we have come a long way in our battle in recognizing that the PTA is a draconian piece of law and that it ought to be repealed. But then the question is, what is going to take its place? Now, there is a bill that is earmarked for enactment as a replacement to the PTA. Now, what does that bill look like, and what does that entail? Now, that has been the biggest challenge as far as the anti-PTA movement has been concerned, is that although we celebrate the repeal of the PTA, although the government promises that this is a repeal of the PTA, what it seeks to replace is sometimes even worse. And that is something that we saw in the anti-terrorism bill that was brought by the previous government of the presidency of Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, where it was even worse. I think what would be really good news is a proper consultative process where the publication of a white paper and widespread discussion at all levels as to what kind of law and how should it be. Now the act that you that was stated that will replace the PTA with regard to organized crime and narcotics and drug offences. The PTA is being used for those instances also, even now.
I mean, the PTA has been used for all kinds of absurd so-called offences, including journalists practicing their profession and civil rights activists arguing on behalf of society.
Yeah. So the real issue, Niresh, is not exactly what do we call this act. Is it how much of power does it give the police and the executive, and how much of power it denudes or takes away from the judiciary, and how much of procedural rights are deprived. So the journalist who was earlier arrested under the PTA for, within inverts, terrorism charges might now be arrested under, within inverts, organized crime charges and have no rights. So that's the kind of issue that we really need to be focusing on. And that has been the problem with the PTA also. It's the denial of procedural rights, number one, and B, the taking away of the powers of the judiciary. So those are the two issues that we really need to focus on. And if we can, and if the new act addresses those issues, then certainly we have something to celebrate.
Right. So you're absolutely right. And whenever a government or a ruling party has tried to bring a replacement act, such as the anti-terrorism bill, which we saw earlier, that has ended up being even worse or on par with the PTA. So, and that's clearly not good enough. That's just sort of changing the name.
Yes.
So that won't do. But in this case, according to what the ruling party has said, this is not aimed at terrorism per se, but organized crime, underworld, and drug racketeering. So obviously the wording has to be completely different. You simply cannot be, this is not taking the PTA text and putting it to artificial intelligence and saying, give me a rewrite of this. This has to be completely different and completely different objectives, because it is, after all, something which, as we mentioned, it's about organized crime, underworld, and drugs, which are the main law and order issues in Sri Lanka today. I mean, even this morning we had the welcome news that several major drug kingpins and underworld figures had been arrested by the CID, a team which had gone to Indonesia, and they will shortly be brought back to Sri Lanka. But that's the challenge which is facing society. So you simply can't be threatening the rest of society with such a law, which is what the PTA has been doing.
Now, Nilesh, if a law that was targeted at terrorism can be used to arrest journalists, civil society activists, lawyers, and whoever you want, like a boy who pastes a sticker, what is the confidence that you have that a law with regard to organized crime, etc., will not be used in a similar way? We do talk about drug kingpins being arrested, but do we also talk about the many thousands who are arrested for on drug narcotics charges, but who have not of absolutely no evidence whatsoever, where the evidence is planted, or which the government analyst report thereafter returns that actually the substances in their possession were actually not narcotics.
So that happens very frequently.
Very frequently. Now then, in a country of that nature, with such a history, and what I'm saying is not something a revelation I'm making that we are hearing for the first time. I think Mr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa himself said.
Oh, absolutely. On one of our programs, he has said that, and several other advisors to the Ministry of Justice have also said that. Even representatives of the police have said that, because there was one famous case where a senior police officer was charged with a narcotics offense, and then what was later discovered was that it was planted on him.
So if it's so easy, if it's so easy to get the to plant evidence and to get convictions for narcotics offenses and all these organized crime, etc., then I think the new act, if it's as bad as the PTA, would result in even worse consequences. And that is that's why we need to look at what this act looks like, and also that is why we need a widespread consultative process on this issue.
So let me ask you on that. What is the process which should be followed? Because right now we have a situation where the ruling party has a 2/3 majority. So basically, whatever they present in Parliament is going to get passed, as long as the Supreme Court agrees that it does not violate the Constitution. So it is clearly before it reaches Parliament that it has to follow, that there has to be a proper process.
Well, generally, what I think would be a good thing, is now the government published that it's considering repealing the PTA and called for public representations. The time limit was extremely short, but I'm made to understand. But nevertheless, many people did write to the Ministry of Justice, to that particular committee, stating their position with regard to the same. And I think I was involved with several civil society groups that who also made representations that the PTA should be scrapped altogether. So there were several views. There is, of course, the group that says the PTA should be scrapped altogether and replaced with nothing, and that the only laws in this country should be, penal laws should be the Penal Code and Criminal Procedure Code and other criminal penal laws which follow the general criminal procedural rules of the country, which is the Criminal Procedure Code. So there is a view like that. Then there's another view that says that it's PTA minus. The PTA should remain in some form, but with reduced or with improvements, such as how often do they see the magistrate, how often are they produced to court, etc., bail provisions, etc. But before it comes to Parliament, whatever the bill in its whatever form comes to Parliament, the public needs to know what does this bill look like, and there has to be a second round of public comments and consideration that ought to be considered, including on the question of, do we need an act of this nature? Do we need to deal with these issues in a different procedure from the ordinary laws? So those are the questions. There's to be a policy discussion as well. Now that policy discussion, do we need this law, is not happening. The discussion is, we need a law, how does it look like? But the question is, do we actually need it? And should it be, and even if we do need it, does it have to be on a procedural basis that is outside the normal procedure? So those kind of discussions also need to take place. I mean, today 257 individuals and civil society organizations, also the top leading civil society organization with grassroots presence, submitted a letter to the Minister of Justice, stating out this position that that the PTA should be repealed, that the PTA should not be replaced, and that also they have a serious review of what the PTA did and the people and the victims of the PTA, not only in the past but also even the present victims, the people who are currently in detention. I don't think there's anybody in detention. I'm not sure that statistic, but there are certain people in remand under the PTA, and there are also certain people being prosecuted under the PTA. So there has to be a real and proper review of those cases, and remedial measures ought to be taken. So I think if the government goes in for the second round of consultative process, it gives an opportunity for these groups and individuals to set out on those serious policy issues that lie behind this question of the PTA.
Well, that's interesting. When you said that there should be a review of the use of the PTA, and it struck me that you could write books, volumes, not on the use of the PTA, but on the abuse of the PTA. And that's why it is such a draconian law, because it has been, I don't know of any law which has been abused like this, where, governments, multiple governments simply locked up, all and sundry under the PTA, and when they didn't need to. I mean, there's evidence, there's a person who has committed a murder, and that guy, just because the police are a bit lazy or they haven't gathered enough evidence, they just go and use the PTA. And of course, they could have used the penal code, which is quite sufficient. So if you go to And I do agree there has to be a review of the use of the PTA, but that is going to be a horror story, isn't it?
But I think, if we are to come out, there are people who are currently living horror stories as a result of the PTA, and I think it'll be unfair and unjust on them that we say forget about it. I think we need to address those issues. As a PTA detainee myself, and having met and having lived with PTA detainees while in custody, it's not just them and their lives, but it has vastly damaged society and social fabric in a very big way. Particularly those target communities that suffered, particularly the Tamil community in the north, and of course now to a limited extent, and certainly not to that extent, but to a certain extent, the Muslim community now. It has affected those communities and those families in a very big way, and I think it's if we do go into those stories, it will be horror stories certainly, but I think as a society, if we have to avoid these horrors from happening, then we need to have those stories being discussed and heard and watched and understood and analyzed.
Now, I'm going to digress a little bit here. When you were speaking, it struck me that the objective of having a system of laws is to bring society together, to ensure that there is equality in justice and that the systems work. Otherwise, society breaks down. But laws like the PTA, and this is not the only one, but we have had so many laws which have simply torn society apart. If you think back on the Citizenship Act, which was, my goodness, 70 odd years ago, what did it do? It basically tore the country apart on a communal basis. And there are many such laws you can speak of. But why is it that laws are weaponized like this by, after all, Parliament, which is supposed to be representing the people and taking care of and protecting the people?
Well, the answer, Nilesh, is not really in the law in Parliament, because this is not a new thing that laws are weaponized. Laws are instruments for regulation, and so when you do see a particular group or particular something as a threat to your interest, then you use laws to regulate and to crush and to eliminate those threats. I think so. The real answer is in how society in Sri Lanka struggles to come together on certain things. And of course, in that sense, if you look at the history of the PTA, did any media organization maybe 10 years ago say that the PTA should be abolished? Was there any discussion after Easter Sunday that the PTA should be abolished? Was there any discussion that the PTA was being abused after Easter Sunday or any of those big incidents that happened? No, because society was not ready to have those conversations. But we are grateful and we are happy that we are now in a position to talk about have those conversations. But then, like many things that happen in this country, those conversations must happen in the way those conversations ought to happen, not in a way that, okay, now forget about it, we are moving on. It should not be. And also, a statistic that I want to share with you, Nilesh, is that this year alone, from January to May, I think there have been over 40 arrests and detentions under the PTA. And the question that you might ask is, for what?
Well, yes, that is a question, isn't it? For what? Because right now, as far as the government tells us, and as far as we know, the terrorist or terrorism threat from whomever or whatever, whether it's domestic or international, is quite minimal. Of course, society always needs to be on its guard, but why arrest 40 people under the PTA? I'm sure that their alleged crimes could have been dealt with by the normal law, because the PTA is and was always an extraordinary law. It was brought in as a temporary law in 1979, so it could never be considered the regular law of the land.
That's right. And when we talk about a replacement, we are not talking about a temporary replacement. We're also talking about a permanent replacement, which again raises these questions about what kind of society, where are we moving towards? Where are we moving towards? And that's the kind of discussion that we need to have as to whether we need a law of this nature in our books. And I'm sure with the widespread support that the PTA, that the anti-PTA movement enjoys today, that if we really have a conversation at a very grassroots, widespread level, I'm sure the answer will be that no, we do not need all of this. And that the product of whatever this discussion would be something that is, I would say, effective and fair. And that's another point about the PTA, and as to how the PTA has actually not helped fight terrorism, and in fact has helped terrorism.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, that is a given. That has been proven time and time again, that the PTA actually fostered and encouraged terrorism in this country. It did nothing to quell terrorism.
In fact, I think, I mean, this is something that I've shared on Twitter, or X as it is called now, about the incident with regard to the assassination of 2 police officers, which was attributed to the LTTE. In fact, some people were arrested and they were held in custody, and they confessed to the killing. But after Easter Sunday, the investigations under the Easter Sunday revealed that they had been completely on the wrong track, and that the actual persons or that there was evidence of some other third party, or at least Zahran and his group, being involved in this. And so that whole line of investigation was suppressed, and Zahran was kept safe, or that the investigation never went towards Zahran because of the PTA and the fact that those suspects were never produced before a judge.
Right. So you are actually speaking about the Vaunathivu
yes,
incident, which took place a few months before the Easter Sunday attack. And I can tell you, as a journalist who covered the war for perhaps 20 years, as soon as I read about that incident, I said to myself, that's not the LTT, because the LTT has, every group has its own hallmarks, its own modus operandi, and this was clearly not the LTT. So the very fact that, this was blamed on the LTT, which had been crushed, told me that there is greater skullduggery afoot. It was very clear from that. But we will go into all this a little bit more in detail. But right now we need to take a short commercial break. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
A trusted place for your fixed deposits. Valuable FD, 10.25% for 15 months, 11% for 24 months. Valuable FD, the symbol of stability.
The wait is over. 8 nations, 1 dream. The battle begins. Asia's biggest cricket clash returns. Asia Cup 2025 starts September 9th. Feel the roar. Catch all the action Only on TV1.
තනු දිශි ගැන හිතනවා. තනු දිශිට ආදරය කරනවා.
තාත්තා රෝසමලක් වගේ බන්දේසික තියලා ඔයාගේ පැත්තට දික් කරන්නේ. බාඳුරමලක්.
තනු කියන්නේ පුංචි දෙයටත් මහා මොහොතක් පිරින්න තරම් අඬන්න කඳුළු තියෙන ඇස් දෙකක්.
සාම්ප්‍රදායික ගොඩේ කෙල්ලෙක් මැරිකන් මෙරිෂි? නෑ. නෝ වේ අම්මා. කවදාවත්.
සංසාරා අද රාත්‍රී 9:30ට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
ඔබ කාලකන්නෙත් නෑ. ඔබට ඇති නොලැබෙන්නකුත් නෑ බබා. ওই දෙකම තියෙන්නේ තියුනෙත් අතක.
එතකොට හිතයිසිගේ නම්බර් එක කොහොමද ඒ කෙල්ල ගාවට යන්නේ?
පොලිසියෝ.
මං මැරෙන්නේ නෑ පාහරයෝ. දැනුයි මං ජීවත් වෙන්න පටන් ගත්තේ. අද රාත්‍රී 8:30ට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
දැන් මට කියපා. ඔල දෙන්නගෙන් කවුද ඇත්ත කියන්නේ? එළියට ගේන එක තමයි මම වැඩේ මේ තුන සෙට් එකේ ඉන්නවනේ ගෙදර. දැන් ඉන්නේ කවුරුන් ගලවලා ගවුමක් ඇඳ ගන්න. සදේව තමයි වීරගේ හරි පුතා. කැමරාස් උඩ කරන්නේ. බලන්න මොකද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ කියලා.
අද රාත්‍රී 9ට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
ගලා පසින කඳු රැලියක අහිමිව යන උරුමය.
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am with attorney at law Hejaaz Hizbullah, and we are discussing the abolition of the PTA, or the impending abolition, and the possibility that it will be replaced and what will replace it. So we were talking about those incidents prior to Easter Sunday, Hejaaz, and it was very clear to anyone who has ever reported on the war, on crime and so on, that there was something worse coming, and of course something worse did happen, and the manner in which the state apparatus was used by the powers that be, whoever they were, and society knows who they were. The manner in which everything was doctored and engineered is now coming out in various revelations under this government. So there have been many arrests made, including arrests of police officers who were part of this whole sordid affair. So this is the problem with our laws and the way in which our laws are used. So the PTA is just one such law. We have other laws, for example the ICCPR law, which is intended to protect people's rights to all the rights that we have in our constitution, including freedom of expression, but then it has often been used to suppress that very freedom of expression. And then you have the Online Safety Act, another infamous law which even the top official of the UN HCR has called for the complete repeal of that act. So we have this habit of getting the acts wrong. So you're quite right that we should be very circumspect about any new act being brought. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And I think lot of people now would make the I mean, the general public does get misled with the notion that these are laws for combating crime, which is what makes us all safe. And they also make the mistake of, I mean, also, at least there is it's I mean, that's how it's the marketing of the act or the publicizing of the act as being benign.
The disinformation. Let's call it what it is.
Yes,
disinformation surrounding what
yes.
the government would try to do at that particular time.
Yeah. So,
whichever government.
Yeah. So and the thing is what is the key factor is that in all of these acts are little loopholes, or rather black holes, which is where your rights get seriously affected. Now, if you take the ICCPR Act, it's the fact that there is no bail at the first instance, and that the bail has to be obtained from another court. So if you're arrested under the ICPR, you eventually end up staying in remand custody for some period of time.
But then what happens is when the police especially are aware that there is such an act, they will try to use that act because they're lazy. They don't want to take that effort to do some real detective work and gather evidence. And I'm not talking about the police force in general, but there are certain elements which will misuse the acts. And of course, the police force is being restructured now. We're very happy about that. And a lot of rotten eggs are being swept out as well, so that's all wonderful. But in the past, this has happened, and the ICCPR is a prime example. As you said, no bail. I mean, that's quite ridiculous. Why would you have a permanent law which doesn't allow a magistrate to give bail?
And also, Nilesh, I mean, you keep talking about the police being lazy. And because they are lazy in doing
just certain elements,
in doing proper investigation, they use these acts. But actually, I think my view is that it's not that they're being lazy. They know there is no evidence. It's not a question of there is some reasonable suspicion with regard to this individual, but we are lazy to get that evidence, and therefore we use this. No, there are enough cases. There could be those cases as well, but there are enough cases that we know he is innocent. We know there is no evidence, so we use. Now that is real abuse. That is there. Now,
so that's the draconian part of it.
That's the draconian part. Now we talk about that boy. Of course, I must say I'm representing him in court as well. It's about the boy.
So we have to be very careful that we don't, appear to be in any form of contempt of court or interfering with that process.
So he's arrested in the Hiwala on a certain ground, and then the police produce certain documents, and then after 9 months in custody, the police says there's no evidence against him. But when any objective consideration of the material, it's very clear that the police knew for quite some time that there was no evidence, and it's only after it came out in social media and people started talking about it, why is this boy in custody for 9 months, and the police came and said, oh, there is no evidence, we are ready to release him. So there are several cases of instances where the police, when they arrest a person, know there's nothing against him, but then they use this law, and that is the real injustice, and those are the really hardcore cases that we need to be talking about.
Well, those are the rotten eggs in the police department, which I hope are getting swept out.
Is it only in the police department?
Well, certainly not. You have military is also like that. I mean, there have been so many senior military officers arrested this year. I can hardly keep track of them. I do a double take, and I have to think back. Okay, what is this guy in for? Because there are just so many who have been now arrested.
Yes, and that's a very, very serious indictment on those institutions, and how those institutions are supervised.
Well, that's very true, because many of these institutions have operated like private armies and mafias. I mean, we have so many. The Navy had issues with a particular bunch of officers. The Army, military intelligence. There's some evidence even in cases like the Lasantha Vikramatunga assassination, where, I mean, nobody's saying it was a bunch of civilians who came and murdered him in broad daylight. So, these institutions have, hopefully they have gotten control over their rank and file and their officers, because in the end, it's not just a bunch of soldiers. There is always a much bigger plot, which invariably leads back to politicians. So you're right that institutions need to be better policed.
You're right, and that is so coming back to the issue of the PTA or any law, is that when you're structurally weak, then these laws will then be used in even more diabolical manner. Structurally changing and supervising and monitoring these institutions will also take not only a longer period of time, but also consistent work. It is precisely because we still have not done that and are not ready to do that yet, that we also need to be then careful about the type of legislation that we are enacting and the amount of power we are giving to these institutions, which are structurally very weak and open for abuse.
Well, now you spoke a little bit about the process which should go into the drafting or even the consideration of a new law, including the public consultation and consultation with various stakeholder groups, and of course legal groups as well, and a white paper and so on. But I would also add that you need to have a devil's advocate who should look at what is being drafted and say, well, if I want to abuse this law, what are the loopholes, and figure that out, rather than, have all the good guys drafting the law and then it's passed, and then, for want of a better word, the bad guys say, oh, we can pick that loophole and abuse this law. So you need to have that devil's advocate, that back and forth, that debate over it.
Actually, the interesting part about a lot of these drafting processes is that you don't get the devil. It's like, now this is something that we saw in the anti-terrorism bill, or at least what we'll know is, for example, representatives of the Bar Association who sat on the drafting committee did not sign off on the last draft that was eventually gazetted, and that eventually came to the Supreme Court. And so this is something I think.
Then what's the point of the process?
Yeah, and the reason is because because I think the final draft was not something that the committee decided, or I'm not sure the intricacies, but what we do know, and this is something that have been discussed in the media as well, is that the draft came from somewhere else. So, and when you look at the composition of these committees, you get a bunch of lawyers, most often criminal lawyers, and you get a lot of people from law enforcement. But you never get victims, the victim voices. So rather than talking about if you are bringing in a law that is going to address loopholes, the people who are sitting on it are actually people who represent the groups that have manipulated and abused those loopholes. And the chances are quite high that they will keep loopholes there. So the people that you really need to be listening to are the people who have been abused and who have been victims of the loopholes, who can tell you, well, if you have something like this, this is what happens. Now, for example, in the anti-terrorism bill, you do have a provision where a suspect will meet the magistrate every 14 days. But it's a reality, and this is a reality that I saw myself, is that people are abused and tortured, but will not talk about it no matter who turns up, as long as they are in that cell.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that is a given. So that system needs to be changed. You simply cannot have a person who is being tortured in custody. You can't expect him to suddenly forget all that trauma when he sees the magistrate and in a clear, level-headed way say, I am being tortured, that kind of thing. Because the torture, I mean, we are all human beings and it affects us deeply and psychologically. And of course, those who are torturing give the warning, don't open your mouth or something worse will happen to you. So, and not everyone is as educated as a lawyer such as yourself or a journalist such as myself. Just imagine the ordinary citizen. And this is affecting the ordinary citizens, not exactly the higher echelons of society. So this clearly, there is clearly a problem in the drafting of our laws, and I would say we need to take a step back and take a look at how we go through this process, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think the process, I mean, if you are to make a good faith engagement in improving and not wanting to repeat the mistakes of the PTA, certainly the victims ought to be heard, and the victim voices ought to be heard in that even the drafting process. And that is why a wider consultative process is absolutely required. It is not saying that the consultative process, I mean, there was at least a call for public comments was not there. It was there. But I think we also need to take it.
That's not good enough.
That's not good. We need to take it further, and also we need to have conversations on a policy level as to whether we do need these laws, and if we do need these laws, what to address what issues and how should it be. So those kind of policy discussions ought to take place, are not taking place. What we do, what does happen generally in these legislative processes is that there's a draft bill, it's gazetted, then it's a matter of it being argued before the Supreme Court, also in a very narrow window of time. It's a very, even the Supreme Court hearings are very, very narrow.
You can't have a narrow window of time. That's a huge problem in the process. Why would you're going to subject society for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years to this law, and you say, okay, within just a few weeks, everything has to be decided.
Yeah, Supreme Court, I may be wrong, but I think from the top of my head, as I recollect, the Supreme Court has just 21 days to look into this, have the hearings.
No, I would submit that is utterly contemptible of the Supreme Court. You are not giving the Supreme Court the respect, because how dare you set a deadline for the Supreme Court? If they need to take 2 months to consider it, they should be given that 2 months, not given a deadline. Okay, at midnight. This is not a Cinderella. So you can't tell the justices, and it's often a 5-judge or 7-judge or a full bench which is deciding. You can't tell them, well, you've got to give a decision by this date and time. That's ridiculous.
And so the result of all of this is always, and that is something that we saw in a big way in the online safety bill and the deliberations. Of course, the judges did sit till very late, but in this whole process, there was a sense of things being rushed through.
But we see that. I mean, when something is amiss, we all spot it immediately. Okay, this is not following a proper process. It is clearly a piece of legislation which is going to be used by the powers that be, whatever ruling party is in office at that time. So it's not a law for the people, it is a law for the benefit of the rulers. So you can't have laws like that, can you?
Absolutely.
Right. And also when it comes to this drafting of laws, I'm looking at the wording which we saw in the media, especially of what is going to replace the PTA. And we were told that it is an act which will battle organized crime, underworld, and drug racketeering. And I'm just wondering, why is it that we don't have laws which can already take on these? These are not new problems. Organized crime is not a new problem. Underworld is not a new problem. Drug racketeering, these are age-old problems which have menaced society. Don't we have the legal framework to take this on?
I think, and that is also why I remain worried as to these, as to the new act. I do not think there is any opinion or any data, at least, or even a notion that the reason that we are unable to deal with drug racketeering, drug trafficking, underworld, and organized crime is the absence of laws.
I mean, let me put it quite succinctly, Hejaaz. The reason that organized crime, the underworld, and the drug kingpins prospered in Sri Lanka is because they were hand in glove with certain politicians. We all know this. This is not something new that I'm saying. You know, you have to break that nexus, and then you're fine.
Then you're fine.
Yeah. So it's not an. I would say it's not an absence of laws.
It's not an absence of laws, and that is why we are worried as to why are we? So is it some sort of is it part of the disinformation? It is like, because we also had the Rehabilitation Bureau of Rehabilitation Act, which was
again another draconian law legislation
brought in. Of course, we were lucky there because the Supreme Court did strike out the draconian parts, at least most of it, and so it was put forward as drug rehabilitation, or as part of a overall drug rehabilitation program. But then it had opportunities for the government to just pick anybody they wanted and said, he has crazy ideas, he needs his ideas rehabilitated, and take you in for rehabilitation. I mean, it was that wide. This is the
sort of science fiction movie that we used to see back in
Orwellian
the 80s
movies,
and
Big
90s.
Brother.
Exactly.
It was a real Big Brother Act. It's a real Big Brother Act. So, but it was called the Bureau of Rehab, very benign Bureau of Rehabilitation bill, and there were lots of very happy, positive words in it. But at its core, it was this very dark project that was being put forward. So that's the same fear that we have. And I must say, despite all the faith we have in the Supreme Court and the judicial special determinative procedures, as you correctly said, Niresh, it's a very rushed process, and it's very, and then and also another point is the fact that the Supreme Court does not decide whether this is needed, not needed, right or wrong. All what the Supreme Court decides is whether it violates fundamental rights or not. It's a very narrow scope of review. So that broader discussion about whether this is good, whether this measure is effective,
whether it's needed at all,
whether it's efficient, whether we can do it with something lesser, better, whatever, that discussion does not take place in the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, the Sri Lankan legislative history, particularly with regard to these human rights invasive legislation, the only opportunity for the public to really engage with that act before enactment is before the Supreme Court, which is also a very narrow process. And that is why I think a lot of civil society groups, and certainly the group that handed over the letters today, 257 groups, and the signatories to that letter are demanding that there must be a white paper or much wider discussion about this new act that is about to be brought in instead of the PTA.
Right, and I'm afraid we are out of time, but let me leave our viewers with this thought. We asked for system change. That means change all the systems for the better, and the drafting process of our legislation, whatever the law may be, is flawed. It doesn't give the Supreme Court enough time. It does not give civil society enough time. It does not give the victims enough time or a voice to be heard properly. So that system is flawed. We need a system change for the way we draft our laws. And thank you very much to Mr. Hejaaz Hizbullah, attorney at law.
Thank you.
Always refreshing to have your views on this program. And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.